of you for coming back in after lunch and braving the rain. I hope that you're all alert and well fed and maybe had a little coffee to keep you going here. This is a very intimate crowd, and that actually is a good thing because we want to make this as interactive as possible. We're up here, and this is a subject that is near and dear to all of our hearts, and so we can go on and on about this for days. But we really want to hear some of your issues and challenges as well. So we'll start off with some of the traditional level setting. But then after each question and piece of discussion, we're going to open the floor to questions. So you're welcome to come up to the microphones at any point to raise questions and bring forth some of your own ideas as well. And so really here today, we're talking about what we're calling Mobility 3.0. And what we would have hoped by now is that we are on a certain level of maturity that's been attained in the enterprise when it comes to mobility. But the truth of the matter is, we're still primarily using our mobile devices as email communication tools. And I think we still have a long way to go before we hit that real maturity curve in the enterprise. And there are a number of challenges we're going to discuss today that are part of the issue. But at the same time, we've heard a lot already today about productivity, about agility. These are big topics. Return on investment, another big topic. We're going to talk about these things as they relate to enterprise mobility and really try to get a handle on what it means for the organization. And so first, I want to just quickly introduce our panelists, and they'll talk a little bit about what they're working on and what they do, and then we'll go into some questions and discussion. So first, to my left is Ashish Mahadwar, and he is SVP of Cognizant. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you work on and things that you're hearing from your customers?
Sure. Thanks, Susan, and it's great to be here. I'm responsible for all enterprise applications as well as mobility at Cognizant globally. So we work with, as a company, we are about 150,000 people globally, and we cover the entire spectrum of consulting services to outsourcing. And it's interesting what we're seeing out there in the mobility space. Last year, we did over 300 mobility projects across industries, and we're seeing those numbers go up significantly. This year already, we've probably done much more than what we did last year. So we're seeing significant growth across both B2B, B2C, as well as B2E areas in terms of employee-facing apps.
Great. And next we have Robert Naylor, who is the CIO for the Federal Communications Commission. And you've worked on mobility as well as security challenges across many different areas of government. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and what you're working on.
Okay, thank you, Susan. It's great to be here. I am working a lot on cybersecurity, working with other government agencies, trying to do a best-of-breed approach and trying to learn quickly and get ahead of the curve. On the mobility, also trying to get a little bit ahead of some of the other agencies and where they're at. So we're doing a lot with test pilots, rollouts in certain areas with Native American, tribal nations. We're doing some with service-disabled individuals in our organization. So we're really trying to figure out where the mobility can play a place in the organization quickly, like bring your own device type of scenario. I'm working with the Small Agency Council on that. So it's a pretty exciting time.
Great. And you're in a little bit of arms race against some of your other government counterparts, right?
We like the competition.
Great. And Eric Skase is the Chief Security Officer for WWPass. And why don't you tell us about your background, because it's pretty fascinating, and how it relates to what you're working on in mobility today.
Oh, hi. Well, probably like half the people out here, what I did for a career had no resemblance to what I studied in college. My degree work is in meteorology, and I started working as a tornado and hurricane forecaster, which is very relevant to the symposium, but quickly started working on international data networking problems for the National Weather Service, and went to work after that, for a small packet switching company called Telenet, which got absorbed into Sprint, and then in 1995, joined UUNet Technologies to build their first global internet commercial network backbone. And at that time, I can say I was an enterprise mobility worker. My job on Monday morning was go to an airport with a cell phone and a laptop and an American Express card. And today, now 18 years later, I think things are not really any different, other than I have an iPad instead of a laptop, but still the American Express card and still the cell phone. So our organization does things both for mobile applications, but also for non-mobile applications. One of the biggest problems that's difficult to do well is to figure out who is using your application. And we provide a third-party authentication service that can simply for the user, but quite accurately for the application, identify that you are you, different from every other person and machine on the planet. But we, as the service provider, actually know nothing about you, not even your name. And we can do this for any application with a single credentialing system. So this gets rid of all the things that we used to carry in our wallets, all these ID cards and this vast array of tokens and RSA devices. So that's our first service, and our second service is to be able to have people who are working mobily store information very safely in the cloud so that it's not in any one particular location, cannot be found or personally identified. And even if it's assembled, it's encrypted with keys that we don't control. So that's what we do in life.
And I can see that your tornado background does come into play here.
They don't allow me to throw anything in the government.
Yeah, right. No more throwing, and please don't throw things at us. And Todd Schofield is head of enterprise mobility for Standard Chartered Bank. You're an international concern, so you've got global issues to be worried about, and I'm sure security and authentication are top of mind. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you do and what you're working on right now?
So we do quite a bit. So Standard Chartered Bank, if you're not familiar with it, is a 150-year-old international bank spread throughout Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. We have about 80,000 employees and therefore a very large enterprise to support. And we have about 2,000 branches, and we do both retail banking as well as wholesale banking. So my role is I started our enterprise mobility group a couple years ago, and I'm in charge of that program, as well as a technology and innovation studio that we run in San Francisco. So there's been a lot of this that's been happening, and especially in the international arena, being able to enable our workforce to be mobile across borders in different offices with different infrastructures has certainly been challenging, but it's something that we've made a lot of progress on.
Great. We'll talk more about that. I think one of the things that we still have a long way to go with is the idea that mobility is a thing of the future. And many of us were mobile workers 15, 20 years ago, but the technology has kind of caught up and enabled us. But yet there's still, some cultural challenges within the organization. I had someone who was the head of enterprise mobility for Johnson & Johnson once tell me that he was rolling out a mobility solution for a number of their field service workers in the healthcare sector, and he would go to the meetings and say, hello, I'm from the future. Because in spite of as advanced as we all think we are, and many of us in this room are, the average worker may not be as comfortable with some of the ideas when it comes to changing the way they work. So there's a top-down, bottom-up kind of a situation happening. But that's one of my observations into what's going on with mobility. But I'd love to hear from the panelists what you see as some of the primary mistakes that enterprises are making when it comes to mobility right now. Ashish, want to get us started?
So if you look at it, what's going on out there, there's almost, I think you used the word earlier about an arms race, right? So that's really what's going on. Everybody's out in this race to build apps, and we work with a lot of large Fortune 500 companies, and we see across different divisions, there are like tens of projects going on in parallel to build apps, and there's just such a large focus on getting that app out of the door. But very few companies really are thinking about creating an enterprise strategy, enterprise mobility strategy, looking at the business as a whole and what makes sense. Where does it make sense to invest in? How are you going to manage these apps once you put them out? Things like that. So that's one of the areas. The other area is there's very little attention being paid to usability, and mobility, we believe, is all about experience, right? So whether we go to iTunes and download an app and whether we use it or not depends on how user-friendly and usable it is and how intuitive it is. And we see a lot of organizations taking a typical IT-based approach rather than a more consumer-based approach towards mobility. And in many of those cases, those initiatives are not succeeding the way they kind of looked at them originally.
And I'm just going to throw back at you a quote that we heard this morning, that roadmaps, plans, and strategies are part of the tethered world, and that by the time you have a strategy, the world has changed. Agility will eat strategy every morning. So do we need a mobility strategy?
You absolutely do, because you're looking at essentially opening up doors, multiple doors to the enterprise. Even if you look at it from a security perspective, and of course Robert is probably much more better at speaking at this than I am, but you are opening doors to the enterprise in different ways, and you've got to be able to secure those entry points into the organization. You've got to look at how you're going to integrate your back-end systems into these platforms and how you're going to manage it over a period of time, right? So without a strategy, I mean, it's like one of my colleagues says that, if you don't have a plan, you will fail, right? So strategy does not have to be a, 6-month, 8-month, 24-month kind of exercise. It can be extremely agile as well, but it's more about making sure that you've thought through all the different elements so you actually allow your enterprise to be more agile in putting apps out there.
Okay. And what about you, Robert? What are some of the mistakes that you're seeing?
Well, in a government, we never make mistakes. No, of course not, right? So culturally, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned about culture, because that's, in the government, that is a concern. When you talk about having a strategy, we have a process and kind of a bureaucracy around a strategy. So agile in the government can be a little bit of a challenge at times, and sometimes by design. I think security is one of the biggest mistakes people make when they think about mobility. Now, in the government, we have a special scenario because of the optics on iPads and iPhones and other tablet and smartphone devices. As a taxpayer, you look at your government and say, I can't afford to have an iPad. Why should, our federal workers be having an iPad? How do you prove the ROI on that? So we're very conscious about, trying to spend our money wisely, but also making sure that there's no perception of wasting any money in that area. So this is kind of a combination of both security and a culture. On the security side of it, you can do things like secured containers, you can encryption at rest, encryption and transmission. You can do the remote access for a thin client, which is a dual factor authentication. So the tablets and the smartphones really, in many ways, are not as insecure as people will tend to believe. I mean, they can be, but if it's deployed properly, it's no less secure than your BlackBerry. I like to say, in the agency, we'll have armed guards in front of the door with bomb-sniffing dogs and snipers on the roof with a sign that says, "Come around to the back, we're open." So the door's wide open. With security, you have to figure out where is your weakest link. And really, on mobility, while it has some challenges that we need to make sure we address, it's not as weak as some of the other areas where we have potential problems. So it's really relative to the other side of it. So for us, it's a combination of two things. It's a culture, and then there's perception of security.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I remain skeptical about the excuse that mobile devices are insecure. I mean, there was an article or an incident a couple of years ago where a van in the Bronx that had backup tapes from a major hospital organization, with millions of personal patient data, was stolen from the street. Now, chances are they stole it for the van, not for the backup tapes, but that's no more or less secure than anything that can happen on your mobile device. So pretty interesting. Eric, what about you? What do you think are some of the mistakes?
Well, I agree with all of my colleagues, of course. But I guess I would add two other dimensions to it. One is I think we do a really crappy job of explaining to people how they should be using these new mobility-enhanced applications. Just because someone can instant message me 24 hours a day doesn't mean it's appropriate to do so. Someone earlier today talked about the flood of email messages that comes in that they largely ignore in their mailbox, and that says something about the people who are sending them. We're not bringing a proper work etiquette culture to apply to these tools. That's one thing. And the second thing that I think we make a big mistake about is we assume the basic infrastructure is stable. And in fact, the underlying infrastructure for most mobile applications is quite brittle. How many of you have sat in this auditorium here today trying to get onto some cell phone network or another, or get into your mail server while someone said something boring, like what I'm saying right now, and found that for whatever reason you aren't able to do that? There are problems with our...
It's probably the FCC, I'm sure.
Yeah. But
We're doing something here.
We rely on the idea that there's going to be this universal wireless infrastructure supplemented by all these cell phone carriers offering some alphabet soup of internet capabilities for us to tap into, and expect that these mobile applications will be 100% usable no matter where we go in the planet. And in fact, that isn't the case. And it's getting worse. RF pollution, for example, is contaminating the radio spectrum on which we rely for our wireless communications, and that's becoming more and more of a problem.
Right. And
So,
it's only going to be more complicated as we move into M2M communications.
right. And so when we build these applications and we say, oh, fine, you are now untethered, we have to say untethered, but when that doesn't work, it has to fall back to something else, and do so ideally in a way that's seamless.
All right, Todd, I promise I will not leave you last all the time, but.
No, it's fine. So I think we have issues as far as, especially how we think about the devices, the way we apply traditional corporate IT thinking. And what do we do? What do we like to do in IT for control? We like to restrict and we like to lock down. And so if you were to, many companies who will issue an iPhone, for example, will turn off the camera, turn off YouTube, turn off basically everything except email, which makes it a BlackBerry. And so why would you want to try to give someone a device that has all these features and then disable many of them for secure, well, I'm trying to make it more secure, but that's disabling, that's hindering people, and this is why people get frustrated with corporate IT. So there needs to be a different kind of thinking, which is what we're trying to push around. How do you do more enablement? How do you have the users feel like, well, this tool is a springboard that can help me to get more momentum and do more, as opposed to a barrier that I have to get through each day?
So that cultural change really needs to take place both within the IT organization as well as amongst the workers in the workplace. And depending on your industry, your workplace is going to vary in terms of what it can and cannot allow you to do.
That's true. And the other sort of related mistake, I think, is seeing mobility as an all or nothing. And whereas either everything should be able to go mobile or not, when it really needs to be about somebody's role, about the case-by-case basis. In my company, email's mobile. We have several mobile tools for our salespeople, but high-speed sub-second trading systems aren't something that's going to be mobile, and so we need to make sure that we have the right mobile strategy. In some cases, it might be not mobile at all for each case.
I want to go back to something you mentioned, which is the typical scenario of, being a device-driven mindset when it comes to mobility, right? IT is accustomed to providing hardware, servicing hardware, somewhat providing software support, of course. But the mentality is, here's the device we give you. You will use this device for X number of years, and nothing kind of changes for a while. And when it does have to change, it's like a major upheaval in the organization. Mobility is changing at a constant rate, so it completely runs counter to the way that we're used to working in IT. So it kind of requires a shifting mindset in the way we're approaching this, and I think that's a challenge for a lot of organizations.
It's the consumerization of IT. Yeah, that's what probably mobility is helping drive the most.
And it brings a lot of risk as far as shadow IT. Someone earlier mentioned that at a workstation, there's the computer I gave them, the corporate machine, and then there's their own personal machine. And it's wind up as a bit of a slippery slope as far as, well, when or if will work start to move more and more towards the personal machine, which might include things that should not be on a personal machine.
Well, and then, what that means is we're really taking a move away from a device-centric approach to the movement of information through the enterprise, right? So we have to step back from the device. You can't, God knows you can't line up behind BlackBerry now, unfortunately, unfortunately for them. So you have to kind of step back when you're talking about mobility and say, this isn't so much about the device, it's about what we're able to do with it and what implications it has throughout the organization. So it's almost like a reimagining of your productivity and your metrics and all of the ways that you kind of evaluate how your people work. So it's a totally different driver than I think people really give it credit for. Everybody kind of thinks about mobility as, here's the device, go to work, use it. But it really can be a driver for major change within the structure of an organization if you let it. And Ashish, I want to hear a little bit more from you, because you talked about a meeting that you went to of global manufacturing CIOs. And you mentioned that mobility was like the topic that dominated the conversation. So what are the issues there? What were you hearing, and how far along the mobility curve would you say we've progressed?
Right, so this is interesting. This was our manufacturing advisory board meeting where we had clients. We had about 7 or 8 CIOs from Fortune 50 manufacturing companies across different segments of manufacturing. And it was a day-long session, and we organized it based upon where they currently spend their money, which is ERP and CRM. But they actually wanted to talk a lot more about mobility than about any of the other topics, and we ended up spending more time talking about mobility than anything else. And in manufacturing especially, and you mentioned briefly earlier about M2M, but that's really where they see a significant opportunity, where you can start connecting. It's really combining your product part of your enterprise with the traditional IT part of your enterprise, connecting your shop floor and your top floor so that you can exchange information a lot more quickly and take decisions a lot more faster, right? So plant managers are producing stuff, and they're not connected back to what's happening in the field in terms of what customers are buying and what competition is trying to sell and how they're looking at their products, and therefore how do they change their production plans in line with what's happening in the marketplace. So mobility really is enabling these enterprises to get closer to the customer much more than ever before. Even with social mobile, you can actually get information about how consumers or customers are viewing your products back to your product management groups a lot more faster than you could have ever done before. Traditionally, customers would, use their call centers and, information that they're getting from their customers in the call centers and try and feed that back. But now you can get it directly back from your consumers, and that can significantly influence not only your product design, but also the speed at which you're designing and putting new products out there.
But is any of that really inherently tied to something being mobile? Or is it just an evolution of our general environment of systems and applications that are out there?
It's a combination, right? Because the reason why Twitter is Twitter and Facebook is because you express yourself. Mobile enables you to express yourself while you are going through that experience, right? So it's the same concept here with products that manufacturers are looking at enabling, which is while they're experiencing, while you're in a car, while you're using your refrigerator, while you are in your forklift truck or whatever else you may have bought, and you're experiencing a problem, you can report it directly from there rather than calling in and waiting for somebody to pick up the call and then be able to explain the kind of experience you're having with that particular product. So it's really basically being able to take an experience in real time and convey it back to different parts of the organization.
But how much of that is just noise? People generate a Facebook post because they have 30 seconds, they're sitting around and they're bored. And half of that is junk. What you really want are the well-considered feedbacks, because that's the more significant one.
Well, that's the challenge of big data overall, right? Is to find the patterns that are actually meaningful and to tease out the information that makes sense. And then, to Robert's point earlier, deliver what's essential to that mobile device and make available from that mobile device the feedback that's essential to your operation, whether it's customer-facing or a B2B application or a field workforce application. And Robert, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the experiences with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and how mobility has changed your organization's ability to reach people and to really communicate in a way that is pretty revolutionary.
So thank you. That's interesting. We're trying to pilot the technology and get real feedback from the end user. When we talk about security, the greatest risk to security is the end user. That's your weakest link. We have a Native Affairs office that typically is underfunded, underserved. They have a mission to go out into remote places, sometimes in areas where there's no roads. When they interview the tribal chiefs, they have to videotape them and bring back that information to the agency. So I met up with the head of our Native Affairs office and said, look, let's pilot a couple mobile devices that had the cameras built into it and video capabilities. It has GPS built into it. It's a small office, so it's like this is a good example to get real-life experience in an area where you have part of the population is underserved for broadband. It's very hard to get broadband, in some cases cellular service. So, I wanted to equip our team, it's a small enough team to do a pilot, with the best technology that would help them meet their mission. And in the Native Affairs area, it's very distrustful of government to begin with. So to sit there and say, introduce yourself and say, by the way, I have a camera here that I have to, interview you with, for anybody, it's very daunting. When you have a tablet that has a camera built into it, you said, you can say, yes, we're going to go ahead and record this, but it's not, it's very unintrusive. They're aware of it, but they feel more comfortable during that process. And then you can play it back for them, on a good sized screen. So that's an area. Also within that same bureau, we had special disabilities, a few attorneys that have accessibility issues. And some of the technology on the smartphones and the tablets really help that community. It's also another community that's kind of underserved. So in a way, it's interesting because you have technology serving the least of the functions of the agency that traditionally get technology. They're always thought at the tail end of the line. And in this case, it was small enough and helpful enough that we could make the business case to say, let's go ahead and do a pilot. And so you're really helping two potential parts of the organization that have always been traditionally overlooked.
And how do you measure that? What are the metrics that you use to kind of gauge whether this is a success or not?
When the head of our tribal nation comes back and says, now we want to set up internet cafes, and they're bringing back a lot of positive attributes. We're looking to maybe do a collaboration with other agencies that have Native Affairs outreach to see how we can leverage that technology, as I said, like the GPS location and so forth, consistently across the government, kind of lessons learned, the collaboration aspect of it. So I think there's no hard metrics, but when you see that there's a passion for it, when you see that that's being adopted more quickly than other areas, and they're really thankful at the end of the day, especially in an area that's, as I said, a little bit distrustful of the government for some good reasons, it's nice to see that you're having a positive impact.
And we talked a little bit about the connection of the information coming to and from a mobile device and how it integrates back into your organization, what kind of data is coming into it. I call that the B to B to C back to B loop. And it's kind of this endless loop of information that keeps coming back into your enterprise, not only through mobile devices, of course, but through any form of feedback. But I think mobility, especially outside the US, has opened up this feedback loop in an even more astronomical way, I would think. And Todd, I'd love for you to tell us about some of the experiences that your bank has in providing customer-facing mobile applications outside the US and how you're creating that feedback loop within the organization.
So we do quite a bit of feedback. We have a suite of banking products called Breeze, which combines mobile banking, being able to do mortgage assessments, lots of different tools that our customers can use on a mobile basis. This is on our for retail, and it all links back into the online banking systems as well. So, but what we have to do as a British bank, we are governed by the British laws, but in each country we also have to comply with the financial regulatory authority in each country. So in the Hong Kong Monetary Authority or the Monetary Authority of Singapore, they will come in and audit us, and for mobile especially, in some cases there is a second factor authentication required that might be an RSA token. In some cases it might be software. In some cases we can use SMS as a one-time password. So there are a variety of things that we have to consider as we look at how do we do banking, and we want to be able to get more into our customers' hands. So we've created for Android, for iPad, for iPhone, and we try to really make sure that we're giving customers the options that are out there. So if the next big wave comes tomorrow, we will want to make sure that we are being able to provide to our customers what they need and trying to make it easy for them to have a good experience as they bank with us.
And so what are your metrics for measuring success? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right, around mobility is figuring out that ROI and, giving the business case. And so I'd like for you to tell us about your metrics, but also tell us about your internal culture. Is mobility something that's supported from the top of your organization throughout, and is that required? And then, how do you measure the success?
So in our organization, mobility is supported from the top, and we have a great CIO with a lot of support to make this happen. We have about 15% of our staff are equipped with mobile devices, and it's been something that's been quite a successful program. We've done everything from build an app store to be able to provide tools, but we've really had to look at where can we get the most gain for it. A mistake that many companies make is to look at, I can do something on my laptop, I want to be able to do it on my mobile device. And where that falls short is that your mobile device has so many more features, geolocation and all kinds of things that your laptop probably doesn't have, that we're not taking advantage of. It's just a matter of moving a certain application or function from making it less of a hassle so you don't have to boot up your laptop and try to find a Wi-Fi connection. You can just do it on your mobile phone. But then there's a gap, and then there is additional technology that we will need to start to really think about that many consumer applications are already doing.
So how do you make the business case? I mean, we heard earlier that the chief marketing officer is going to have a bigger budget than the IT department by 2016, I think. So, how do you make the business case for mobility? Is it time to team up with your chief marketing officer to make sure that the money is there and the investment is there to convince folks within the organization that this is worthy of significant investment? And I'll leave this open to the whole panel.
Well, I think that there needs
not leaving you on the spot there.
No, that's fine. There needs to be some promotion and quite a bit of awareness made. People are creatures of habit, and no matter what kind of device you give them, people will tend to revert to whatever it is they know, whatever it is they've used for a long time, because to them it's comforting and familiar, even though there might be a different way to be able to use a mobile device to be more effective. And so there does need to be a fair bit of marketing play, but also looking at, when you do mobility and mobile devices, are you doing spending instead of or in addition to the technology that you already have? And it varies by organization as far as how they do that, but it's something where you ultimately want it to be able to help either bring costs down or bring revenue up.
And just to add to what Todd said, we've seen this in a few of our customers where they've created this new role of mobile evangelists within the organization, where you have people who can go out, like you said, whether it's a CMO or any other part of the organization, and really educate and get them excited about the opportunities of mobile technology and how it can potentially impact their business. And in some of those cases, not just the business case in terms of how you can reduce costs or increase revenue, but also, for example, in the case of one of our clients, which is a trucking company, how can you shut down the ability of drivers to text while driving, because that can bring down significantly your safety issues and therefore improve your image as an organization in the marketplace. So there's many ways to look at ROI and benefits that can be enabled through mobility. And it's not just the traditional business case of, I can cut my cost by so much, or I can increase my customer satisfaction levels by so much.
I think, Todd hit on it earlier when he talked about really understanding how the end users are using these devices. If we as CIOs don't embrace a kind of a bring your own device policy, look at how our end users are using the technology, again, not to harp on the security side of it, but they're going to do workarounds. They're going to be putting privacy data on devices that aren't governed. They're going to find ways. They're going to be bringing it into the workforce. So we have to find a way that we can partner with our end users, recognize that this is where they're at, this is the culture where they're at, and how do we deliver the applications that they need securely and quickly at a low cost. So when you do things like a bring your own device policy, you're in essence bringing it to the forefront, saying we know this is going to happen, we're going to support you, but here are the limitations. Here's our rights, here's your rights. From a capital investment, it minimizes that. It kind of helps bring it into the organization. So it's kind of a try and buy, and it takes away some of the fears. And then from there you can expand into where's the ROI on the actual capital investment. as well as the productivity. Happy end users, more productive. They're working at home these days. So, if you're giving them the right technology, you're investing in your people. And if you give them the services that they need, they're going to do it anyway. So the question is, do you want to be part of it, or do you want to learn about it later when it's a problem?
And that's a major shift in mindset, even from 3 years ago, for a CIO to be able to say something like that, because the block was still there even as many as 3 years ago, or as few as 3 years ago, I should say. Eric, what do you hear from your customers? What are some of the pain points, and how do they prove their business cases?
Well, most of these organizations are struggling with the kinds of security issues that you were addressing. It does get somewhat amplified on mobile platforms, but it's not unique to mobile platforms. And that's probably because of where we tend to specialize, the thing that we hear the most often. And this actually comes from two directions. And we've had this discussion about mobility here without really making this distinction between stuff that's going on with respect to the employees or people who are working inside the organization versus applications and such that are oriented toward the customers or people being served by the organization. And sometimes the thrusts are quite different for the two of them. And certainly the scope of issues is very different for the organization when they're addressing people that, in essence, they have more control over in one sense versus those being served or those who are customers outside the organization, who you have, somewhat little control over, and if they don't like what you're doing, they'll walk away. So, that kind of gets back to what we alluded to at the very beginning. If it's not easy to use and has a decent user interface and so forth, customers at least are going to say, I'll do things the old-fashioned way, or I'll go to your competitor.
Well, and those customers are also the people who work for you, right? I mean, we're all consumers. We're all used to using our mobile devices for some sort of customer experience. And so I think there's also a disconnect between our expectations as consumers and our expectations when we get into the workplace.
I think that's carrying the customer analogy too far. It's like
Really?
people who work for you, you have control over. You have their paycheck. And that's not the case necessarily with the end customer.
But if you care about talent retention and recruiting smart young workers who can easily walk just as quickly as your customers can walk, then
second-order effect or third-order effect. But
sure, depends on the market.
There's another thing we talk about, right, which is the Sunday night, Monday morning experience, right, which is on Sunday night you're sitting at home, you're on Facebook, Twitter, beautiful applications, and then you go in on Monday morning to work, and then you're working on SAP and Oracle and all these kludgy applications. And as the workforces change, right, we work with a lot of global multinationals, and Todd, you would see this as well, right? If you look at workforces in Asia or South America, they're much more significantly younger than workforces in the Western world, and their expectations are very different from technology or applications or anything else. So, as a global CIO or global organization, you have to look at who your employee base is and what the demographics of your employee base is and what are their expectations going to be from what you provide them.
Those expectations different. Can you give an example?
In terms of the usability, right? I mean, like I said, they don't want to use SAP, they don't want to use Oracle, they want to use a Facebook or LinkedIn kind of style of applications which are highly interactive, where you don't have to enter stuff into a database and then get a report a week later. You want instant gratification, right? That's what they're used to, the Generation X. So their expectations of the applications are also similar, where they can get instant feedback back from, and they can connect with the enterprise much better.
And as a tangent, things like training wind up becoming a huge issue, especially if you're in an organization that has a lot of turnover. If your systems are very complicated and hard to learn, you're going to have to spend a lot of time and money on training and getting people up to speed to how to use those systems. But if the usability of it is there, and if it's more intuitive and easier to use, that's something that you can bring people up to speed faster. They can actually probably work faster. There might be better employee satisfaction, but that is arguable. But then if you have high turnover, you're actually winding up saving quite a bit because you have systems that are easier to use.
Yeah, and I think that, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's a key point when you look at your workforce. I was a co-chair for the IT Workforce Committee, and we drafted a Next Generation X. what does the workforce of the future, the workforce of today, and the future look like? And you're having more and more people that are used to the Facebook and the Twitter and the instant gratification, the instant on the applications, any device, anytime, anywhere, model. This is where they're coming from today out of the universities. So if the workforce doesn't adopt to that, whether it's the federal government or the corporate, then you're going to have a disconnect between the people that you're employing, and you're not really necessarily going to offer them an attractive place to come work. If you take a look at some of the Googles and the other the workplaces there, there's a very high degree of technology. There's a nice culture there. It makes it harder and harder to compete for the best skill set when you really don't have a program that meets them where they're at. And they're at the 140 byte mark. They're at the sound byte mark. Emails that are over a paragraph now get moved to a special bin to be read sometime in the future.
Or never.
Or never. You've been looking at my emails again?
Yeah.
But that's where they're at. So you have to. It's just like today. You have to understand who your audience is. And as a CIO, whether it's your end users or your customers, you have to recognize that, and you have to make sure you're serving that need.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of audience, how many people in this room work for a company that has a BYOD policy right now? Less than I would have expected. Interesting. That kind of surprises me. Does that surprise you guys? Or do you think there's still a long way to go before we achieve a more commonplace BYOD?
No, doesn't surprise me. I
Why?
mean, the organizations that will move the slowest are the biggest employers. Speaking in very broad brush. So when you take a sample like here, if you were to count organizations that allowed a BYOD thing, probably I would guess it would be more skewed to organizations with a slightly smaller employee base on average. But it takes time to roll that out into a place as big as, say, AT&T, for example.
Although we heard earlier, a company the size of Accenture has 70% of its devices are BYOD. So.
No, absolutely, and we see it because we work across a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and we certainly see it accelerating. So it's not whether, but it's just when. And it will definitely happen in the next 2 or 3 years where almost all companies, I saw a report which said by 2015, almost 90% of all Fortune 500 companies will have a BYOD policy. So you can try and push it out for a little bit, but it's not going to stop. And people are already doing it. And there's a lot of companies where people carry 2 devices. You have a personal device and you have the one given by the company. And it's not efficient. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, so. It doesn't. I mean, it does from a security standpoint. And it does from the standpoint that you can turn it off. It's like, I'm done work now. It's Friday night. So bring your other device makes sense for many people. They don't want to have everything integrated on the same device.
Right. Yeah, we had an interesting situation like that in our own organization where we're now owned by a publicly traded company, and all of a sudden, the restrictions upon your own personal device became too onerous for a lot of folks, and we opted for the company-issued device. So I think it's going to be a scenario where you see a mix for a long time. And again, it depends on the industry that you work in and how the size of your company and what some of the regulatory environments are that you're trying to operate in.
Just to follow on to that, one of the things that I've seen that's been very interesting is people that I know who are, let's say, within 5 years of graduating from university, are actually changing behavior. And they are building firewalls between what they do professionally and what they do socially, to the extent that they don't want their personal telephone number to be part of their work environment. They don't want to be receiving email on their own phone or their own iPad. And they don't want to be part of Facebook or Twitter. I've been astonished, actually, at the percentage of people that I know who I would have attributed to being, an integral part of the Facebook generation, who've walked up to me in the last 6 months and said, I've closed my Google Plus account, or I've closed my Facebook account because I want more privacy on the social side of my life compared to the professional side of my life. And yes, I'll maintain my LinkedIn profile, but that's firewalled off from everything else that I have from my other personas. So to me, this is an interesting new trend that may be a swing of the pendulum in a corrective fashion.
Yeah, folks have probably learned from experience, although that's not stopping my 83-year-old Aunt Mary from joining Facebook and posting at will, but she's not looking for a job, so maybe that's why. You know, one of the things we talked about is the user interface, and so I'd like to talk a little bit about what the horizon is for how the user interface is going to change as technology adopts, right? We're talking about the adoption of devices that are touchscreen, for the most part. I heard a great story a while back. A friend of mine gave her toddler her BlackBerry, and the baby, you know, started tapping the screen, and nothing happened, and so she flung it across the room, you know.
My boss does the same thing.
Yeah. So, you know, touch screens are obviously a new way of communicating and a new way of interacting with our devices. Are we going to lose the keyboard? You know, are we going to move to a touchscreen environment for even other devices like our PCs and potentially our large screen, you know, communication devices in the office? What about voice capabilities? You know, where is that going to take us in terms of how we build enterprise applications going forward to take advantage of some of these capabilities? And are there others that you're looking at that are factoring into your plans for mobility?
You know, I used to think that I was a member of the last generation that would learn how to type. And every generation continues to learn how to type. And yes, we have much better voice recognition technology than we used to have. But I look around here in the audience and I see a number of faces that are illuminated by their personal devices. And I don't see any of them speaking into their personal devices. They're going to be persistent environments where some degree of privacy and data entry is required, and the keyboard is an appropriate mechanism to enter information in that environment, particularly if you're entering your own personal observations about what you think about this kind of panel, for example. So no, the keyboard's not going to go away. Voice recognition will get better, and it'll be used in some environments, but it'll be just one more tool in the toolkit. I don't think it's going to obsolete some of the stuff that we're using now.
Do we agree with this?
To some extent, because certainly voice is going to play, especially, I was with a bunch of auto companies, and they're driving a lot of innovation within the cars in terms of making sure that while people are driving, when they want to access information or search information, they don't have to get off, lose sight of what's on the road and use voice recognition to even just from a safety perspective, so that they can continue to even hear their emails or even dictate an email while they're driving, but they don't have to take their eyes off the road, right? So you got those kind of situations. You got also situations where people are starting to build biosensors into mobile devices, so that it can actually be used as a medical device as well as for your normal work. So that could be something that revolutionizes the way healthcare functions across the world. Just like your utilities are putting smart meters, your phone can become your smart bio device, which is you're wearing it all the time, so it can collect bio information and send it back. In fact, we did work for one of the largest medical device manufacturers in taking some of the functionality in some of their devices and putting it into phones, so that your phone can actually start sensing your temperature, your blood pressure, and a whole bunch of different body functions, and then start transmitting that back to your physician's office, which can collect the information and raise alarms if it's required. So you're seeing a lot of those kind of innovations that will come into mobile devices. There's gesture-based computing, where you can actually use gestures to communicate commands, not just voice. So there's a lot of stuff still ahead of us.
I think it's going to be the right technology, the right input for the right situation. So, for example, in the car, as you said, it's exactly right. I speak into my GPS, the address, and it's very good. You're also going to see convergence of really the AI and analytics, predictive analytics. So it kind of knows your patterns. It sees, we're seeing that already in some of the devices. When you start to type words, it picks up on that.
Not always so well, but yeah.
Not always.
It's like,
Not
damn you,
always.
autocorrect exists.
It is. But I think you will see more and more of that. So, you'll have a little bit more of a voice interface. It'll be a little bit more direct, a little bit more natural in some cases. In an event like this, you'll have other mechanisms where it could be the keyboard, or it could be a series of common types of phrases that have been used in the past, or whatever makes it more simpler based on kind of analytics that you've already been, how you use your device. I think that's the kind of thing where the apps that you use most often maybe will be moved to the front of the screen, or you know, and the things that you use least maybe off to the side, or those types of things where it's actually kind of customizing intelligently around how you're using these devices. And therefore, the inputs, I think, will be the same type of scenario.
Todd, how much of a factor is that in what you're designing?
It's quite a bit, and especially as we look forward, not immediately, but as we are looking forward, we're very interested in how can we be able to provide support to multiple platforms. So if someone is using a keyboard, that we can support that, as well as looking at, as we're talking about different kinds of devices and the capabilities they have, are there ways for us to use security and look at biometrics? Be it a voice print or a fingerprint or both, combined with something else that assert on the device perhaps. So there are a lot of capabilities that devices have, or that we'll have in the next few years, that we can be planning for, especially as we work towards making sure that we have to have authentication that's approved globally by many different governments. It's something that we have to take very seriously and really be thinking not just about what's the default safest position, but how can we take better advantage of the technology that's out there and bring that in to help make the lives of our customers easier.
Another area is NFC, right? That's another area which is clearly going to impact retail as well as banking industries in terms of being able to
things like
drive.
geofencing as well. Yeah.
How far ahead are we looking here? I mean, what's your roadmap? What's your strategic plan?
Well, I think it's still, you know, I think it's a matter of maturity. It will still be several years before things become really, you know, very common. But much in the example of that, some of the examples we've talked about today, a lot of the functionality won't change, but how you achieve that functionality will continue to evolve.
I know I said I wanted the audience to ask questions. I hope we haven't put you guys to sleep, but you know, if anyone does have questions, please feel free to come up to the microphone. There's microphones in the front here, so come on down. I feel like I'm running a game show, you know. I have no prize for you, but please state your name and your company. I know you, but everyone else doesn't, including the recorder.
Yeah, great panel, Susan, everyone. I'm Jim Erickson, and I'm editorial director with informationmanagement.com. Really enjoying this, and I'm hearing very similar messages from a lot of CIOs that I talk to and interview on a regular basis. Ashish was saying early on that a lot of folks are at a big rush to get apps out the door without having an enterprise strategy. And we're sort of seeing a lot of convergence in the analyst community, in our community, around these sort of arriving horsemen of cloud and mobility and social and analytics, maturing visualization. Are you seeing, trying to create examples of an enterprise leveraging those things at the same time in an enterprise fashion as opposed to a one-off? Can you attack cloud and social and mobility in a fell swoop and really get a bigger lift that way?
Great question.
Absolutely. I mean, we call that the SMAC stack, right? SMAC, social, mobile, analytics, and cloud, right? And if you look at it, there's several examples where those get intertwined. I mean, I can give you an example in retail, for example, where we're working with some of the largest retailers in the world. And if you truly look at their, you know, their workforce, their store associates, some of them have store associates that run into thousands, and they're trying to figure out ways how they compete against their online retailers, right? And the big difference between online retailers and physical store retailers is that the online retailers know who you are, what are you looking at in terms of products. They can give you recommendations about other products. And now, in the real world with mobile, assuming that your shoppers have apps which have got enabled when they walk into the store, now the store associate could know who's there in the store, what their preferences are, and then they can walk up to them and, you know, start providing a lot of recommendations, which it's kind of a similar experience to what you would have, you know, got online, except that now you can actually touch and feel and see the actual product. So it's a combination of many of those functions that can be enabled to enrich the experience in the physical store and actually increase offtake in stores. So that's, you know, just one example of how you can combine all of those elements together.
And I think that's a great point. I mean, the cloud really is a big enabler, right, to the level of mobility that we're going to be able to achieve in the enterprise in terms of where data is stored and how it's accessed and what's required, to be stored on the device versus accessible. So it's a major point. Yes?
Yeah, actually, a follow on that point. Greg Lloyd, Traction Software. To a certain extent, do you believe that the mobile question is a red herring, that the real issue is shared ubiquitous access from whatever device you're using to whatever you care about? I mean, I have the luxury of working for a small company, so we basically have all of our access via the cloud. Actually, it's via Apple. So the whole notion of having more than one address book and having to sync it between my phone and my email and my whatever is some sort of point anachronism. I can have separate address books that are my personal ones and are my corporate ones and access them via the same interface, but what really counts is I control from whatever device I'm at what I want to share, and I have an effective way of essentially establishing boundaries of what's shareable, and I think that is actually setting the bar very high indeed for what people see in their personal life, and I think that's where enterprises are going to have to respond.
But you know, outside of a few specialists, I think generally people don't want to mess with that kind of level of detail. What you were talking about originally about, it being kind of indivisible, what platform you're using or where you are and so forth, that's great because that makes life simpler for people. When you start asking people to say, well, this should work this way, and this person can have access to this, but not to this, most folks cannot be bothered. It's just like life is too busy to get into that level of granularity.
Does anyone else have thoughts on that?
May I just respond one on that?
Yeah.
I was specifically talking about my personal address book versus the shared corporate address book, not any finer.
Right. Yeah. And there are tools to make it so easy right now for people, but go ahead.
I was going to say,
It has to be dirt simple.
in the federal space, I think you're exactly right. I mean, especially with the FCC, we don't want to be supporting any one brand of devices. We need to be device agnostic. So we really are looking at what can we do as a service. There's technologies out there that's cross-platform. As long as we can secure it, as long as the level of data that we're exposing is minimal risk. If it's email, you have that same thing with Outlook Web Access. If you have the RSA Secure ID, you have the same security around that you'd have at any place else. Same thing with the thin client type of approach on any device. So we're truly looking more at saying, what does our user base look like? What is the technology in terms of functionality that we need to get out there? Not necessarily what platform, what specific hardware technology are we going to support? It's more about, what does our user base look like, and how do we make sure that we're giving that right level of functionality? Because if not, they're going to take it anyway. They're going to do it someplace else. So in terms of your personal address book or your corporate address book, yeah, there has to be some type of firewalls on that. Again, I think the way we're approaching it is more like a secured container, where we actually own that portion of your hardware. What stays in there is ours. We can wipe that portion at any point. It needs a certificate to get through. It checks to see whether it's jailbroken. And then you have basically a bring your own device policy that says, we'll take your firstborn if you do anything wrong.
I knew there was a reason why I was childless.
Just don't take my dogs.
Hi, Fred Donovan with Info Security Magazine. The panel's touched on the subject a bit, but I was hoping they'd go more in depth about this tension between companies wanting to secure their data and wanting to defend their networks against malware, and their desire to benefit from the cost savings and mobility of employees bringing their own devices. If you could, and maybe some of the ways they can address this tension.
Well, I think there's a good opportunity to be able to account for both. The sandboxing is certainly a a major way that the people tend to go about it. A lot of the way that we do it at Standard Chartered, for example, is that we allow the devices in our apps to access data from systems, but we don't replicate the data down to those systems. For us, that's just not something that we allow as we write our apps. And in theory, some of those can't be used offline and that kind of thing, but that's part of the trade-off because we have we have to make sure that we're keeping our customers' data very safe, and that means not having someone download it to Excel and then copy it off onto a personal machine, and then no one knows where it will wind up. We need to make sure that the data in the systems is staying in there, but it can be accessible. But while on the go, a lot of it tends to be you can interface it while your session is open, and then your session closes, and then the data is still not on your machine.
But I think that's exactly my point when you talk about if there's a will, there's a way. If people want that data and they want to be working on it at home, if you don't provide them the right mechanism to do it, they're going to find another way of getting it. They're going to download it to a USB drive. They're going to send it to themselves in a Gmail account. We see that going on. So the security around the whole BYOD, the whole wireless stuff is kind of crazy because if you really look at what your end users are doing, you'd be amazed and appalled at the same time. When you really go out there and spend time in a field office and see how they're truly working. Yes, your policies say don't do this, and you set up your security things. But then it's really human nature. That's your weakest link. So you're either working with them or they're going to work around you. So if you don't recognize that, then you don't even realize you have a problem.
And I think apart from that, there is a significant amount of work that's already happening around device management software. So there's plenty of platforms out there, Mobile Iron and Afaria and a whole bunch of them, which allow you to manage, especially from an enterprise perspective, manage information that is there on devices, whether it's supplied by the company or whether the employee got it themselves. And they're going to continue to get more and more sophisticated. So it's no different from what we faced with notebooks. If 10 years back, everybody was asking the same questions that people are carrying these notebooks around outside of the workplace. They're going to start downloading all the stuff, and people found that's what probably drives innovation as well, right? Which is where there's an opportunity and there's a concern, then there will be smart people out there who will figure out a way to address that and make money out of it.
Well, I think there's a little bit of a difference between the notebooks and the mobility devices because in terms of the cameras, and privacy is really huge. So when you get into a whole mobile device management concept where you're taking over someone's personal device entirely, you really fall into that trap of there's privacy photos, there's privacy documents on there. Where's that line and where's that comfort zone that it's not going to be exploited? So if you can contain it in a self-contained, organizationally owned area that doesn't interact with the other side of it, I think that's probably your best way to keep those issues from happening to begin with. Otherwise, if you look into a complete device management solution, you wind up with that potential privacy consideration. And that's really a hard thing to deal with if somebody on the help desk is seeing pictures of things that they shouldn't be seeing or documents or whatever it might be. So the ability to have this multimedia on these devices that you didn't really have on the laptops as much. And the laptops, if it was a business laptop, you always knew, yep, this is business. Whatever surfing they do or whatever documents or photos or JPEGs or whatever, or movies are there, they recognize business versus personal. The problem now is that the line has already blurred, even when you have corporate devices, because it's so easy to use and because there's not sometimes a lot of oversight by design, people will blur that line, and that's where you run into trouble.
Well, I've gotten the sign that we need to start wrapping up. So to leave you all with some key takeaways, I've asked each panelist to think about one action item that you can take back with you as you consider mobility in your enterprise. So let's start with Todd, since I keep calling on him last, and we'll go this way this time.
So my encouragement would be to move away from the traditional IT thinking of saying no and a default position of no, and to look at how can you really take care of your users well, because I think that things are trending towards if you don't take care of your users, they're going to go out and take care of themselves.
Eric?
Yeah, and outsource the things that are hard, like authentication.
Not to your company,
Please.
Recognize that security around these mobile devices is somewhat of a myth, that it's not any less secure than devices that they have already or other areas where there's greater security risks. It has to be relevant to the overall security picture. The fact that these are less secure, I think, depending on how it's deployed, as with any technology, is either a fallacy or there's maybe some truth around it. The fact that there's GPS built into it, that you can remote wipe these a lot easier, that you can encrypt portions of it, adds a whole nother layer of security that didn't exist in some of these other devices in the past. So, don't let people say that security is the reason why you're not going to deploy that. Challenge that. There's technology out there that makes it as safe as any other device that you're working with today.
And I would say, back to where I started, which is don't just go out and build apps, but have an enterprise mobility strategy and make it a business priority, not just the IT priority. So mobile projects shouldn't be just IT projects, but they should be business projects where IT is playing the role of maybe an evangelist or helping drive innovation, but really make it a business priority.
And the one piece of advice I have that I got years back from someone in enterprise mobility is do not try to boil the ocean. So with that, we leave you, and thank you very much for your attention and time, and thank you to the panelists for a great job.